Thank you very much, and thank you for having me at this conference today. It's a pleasure to be here. I thought maybe the easiest way for me to cover the region is through just a few slides, which I'll share on the screen now. And I'll try to be brief in my remarks. And again, during the Q&A, I'm happy to speak about Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, East Africa, but I'll try to put this in the context more broadly of the region. So what I thought I could do is just maybe spend the 5 minutes or so going through briefly how we view the impact of the Russia-Ukraine crisis on Sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in light of the fact that the region is still recovering from the pandemic. Also try to touch on the impact of tighter global monetary conditions due to Fed raising rates, due to tighter monetary conditions because of uncertainty and the impact that has on financial conditions. But maybe first on the Russia-Ukraine shock, very broadly, it's what started off as a conflict between two countries, as a regional conflict, has really spread globally through three main channels. Commodity prices, which were increasing in a number of cases even prior to Russia's invasion, as that trend's only been exacerbated by the invasion because of the importance of Russia, Ukraine, other countries in the region on in terms of global supply of certain commodities. So we've seen a rise in commodity prices, worsening inflationary pressures weighing on growth, weighing on external positions for commodity importers. The second channel, economic and financial conditions, given uncertainty over the conditions in Ukraine, the conflict, how far it could spread, given the impact it's had on growth and the spillover to trade partners globally. We've seen global growth forecasts being revised slightly lower. We've seen tightening financial conditions, particularly adding to or increasing liquidity pressure in lower rated sovereigns. And lastly, security risk, which I think is more of a European specific risk factor here rather than the other two, which are more global. And what you see on the screen here, that perhaps every region is exposed through commodity prices, through economic financial disruption, but you can also see that Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa particularly have exposure via the commodity price and are vulnerable to economic and financial spillover effects from the crisis. And what I would say about commodity prices in particular is that while higher food prices affect every country globally, all emerging markets, frontier markets, advanced economies, countries where household consumption includes a larger share of food and energy prices, these are the countries where we'd expect to see a more severe impact because of the impact it has on inflation, on household spending, on consumption overall. And maybe just to set the scene, even before the Russia invasion started, Sub-Saharan Africa was a region that was still recovering from the COVID pandemic. On the left, you see our estimate of pre-COVID forecast for real GDP and our latest forecast for the region. And what you see is that after a dip in 2020, where growth perhaps was less affected than we saw in advanced economies, where we saw very large 7-8% contractions in real GDP. Most countries in Sub-Saharan Africa had growth marginally positive or marginally negative. We never really saw a bounce back that we saw in advanced economies where they had fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we saw sort of by 2021 a return to pre-trend growth rates. So you have this lost output from 2020 that the region was still dealing with, and now on top of that, they're being hit by this commodity price shock. And you can see on the right side countries how we think about the exposure to both the pre-existing conditions from the deep scarring from the pandemic, from COVID, and the impact, which countries are more vulnerable to a commodity price shock. And so you can see in the top left, countries like Mauritius, like Rwanda, Namibia, so Southern East Africa, in particular, we think about the Sub-Saharan Africa region as a whole. I would say Southern and East Africa are more exposed, just given the higher share of imports of food and energy prices in their import baskets, and the impact that would have on household consumption as well. Now, if I think about higher oil prices in particular, and the impact that would have on the region in particular countries, here you can see on the left side, we just show the impact of a $10 increase in oil prices on current account balances. And so you can see on the left side, countries like Angola, Republic of Congo, the main beneficiaries. Again, this is only a $10 increase in prices of oil versus our forecasts, which are, I think, on average about $30 higher than pre-Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And on the right-hand side, you see the countries most vulnerable, again, highlighting East Africa as being one of the most exposed regions within Sub-Saharan Africa. Countries like Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, all will see current account balances deteriorate because of higher oil prices. And maybe a second factor on why this region is particularly exposed to the spillover from Russia Ukraine is the impact it has on financial conditions and on liquidity risk. So for countries like Kenya, for instance, that require Eurobond issuance, that require market access, or countries even outside the region like Ghana, we've seen a rise in borrowing costs in Eurobond spreads since the start of the year. That has made that really reflects the tighter financial conditions globally, and we're seeing that increased liquidity pressure in certain cases, or add to existing liquidity pressure in other cases. That I think this is going to be one of the key issues for the remainder of the year, to see the impact of Fed tightening, monetary conditions tightening, and the impact of uncertainty over the ultimate resolution of the situation in Ukraine, the impact that has on liquidity risk, particularly for lower rated borrowers. And maybe lastly, before I conclude my remarks, just whether or not a country is an importer of commodities, of food and fuel, higher oil prices are going to raise households' cost of living directly through higher energy prices, and indirectly through higher cost of transportation, higher costs for thinking about production of goods and services. And it's really lower income countries where energy makes up larger shares of household consumption baskets that will be most negatively affected. And this is something that we think could fuel social risks, political risks in countries across the region, given this combination of low household incomes, high share of spending on goods that are being affected by higher commodity prices. And so in general, what we would say is countries with high dependence on food and oil imports, already elevated levels of social risk, a system of governance where individuals really have no electoral outlet through which to voice their frustrations, are ones that we think would be most exposed, are most at risk of political and social unrest. And so you can see here on the left-hand side, we consider ESG in our ratings. We have a social measure of social risk, or a social issue or profile score, and Sub-Saharan Africa, the second group of bars on the right. You see that half of basically the entire region either has a score of 4 or 5, which would indicate the highest level of risk. So the region is coming into this crisis with a lot of underlying vulnerabilities that make it more vulnerable than perhaps others to the spillovers from the Russia-Ukraine situation. Thank you.